Welcome to another episode of Intriguing Beings with me, Roo Chater. Episode 8 with Mark Shinn. I've got a great interview for you today, especially if you enjoy hearing about board design and how some of the equipment that we use in kiteboarding gets created. Mark's been a kiteboarder since the very beginning. He was one of the early masters of the sport, a double world champion and the only person to win both the PKRA Tour and the KPWT Tour, as they were known at the time. No one else has achieved that. He was the only person to do it. And since then, his career has taken a different path, and he's been working on shapes and creating kiteboards with some of the most popular designs on the market being attributed to his genius. He's a very humble guy. He probably won't even like me saying that about him, that I've just said he's a genius. But he is very good at creating some of the best kiteboards on the planet. So in this interview, we do go a little bit techie and we do talk about design quite a lot. But I think it's an important subject and it's a good conversation. And it's interesting to see how much passion he still has for creating these boards and working on the shapes and developing something better in a market that I feel has sometimes stagnated. You know, a lot of twin tip shapers and designers and creators are just churning out similar shapes to last year, whereas Mark's always pushing and trying different things, new materials, tweaks with the flex, tweaks with the shapes, and it really shines through that, you know, a good twin tip can be an amazing kiteboard to use. We also talk about foiling. He's really getting into designing hydrofoil shapes now. So we chat a little bit about that, about his CNC processes, about how he creates prototypes. So yeah, it's a bit of a tech fest, but it's a really interesting one, and I think you'll enjoy it. And what really shines through is Mark's passion for creating something better and for making kiteboarding better, not just for the pros, but for everybody. Some of his latest shapes are more beginner-inspired twin tips, and he really just wants everybody to get out on the water and enjoy riding and have a good time. And that really shines through in this interview. I really hope you enjoy it. Thanks so much for the people that have rated this 5 stars on the apps. I notice I've got a few ratings coming up on iTunes now, so thank you very much for that. As ever, if you'd like to share these episodes with your friends, either on social media or just by telling them down the pub, that'd be hugely appreciated. And you know, all the positive feedback that's been coming in and a few comments about how I can improve things as well would be great. When I recorded the first set of these interviews, it was in the summer before I broke my leg, so I didn't really think about them too much, and now I've had a little bit of time to edit them. I've been working on how I'm going to record the audio. So I'm actually just about to start recording a new batch because I've nearly run out of the recordings that I've had, and hopefully the sound quality is going to be a little bit better. I mentioned the sound quality on this one because it was recorded at the Kitesurfing Armada. We're in one of Mark's friends' camper vans, which unfortunately was a little bit close to the music stage, which pipes up every now and then, so you can hear that in the background. Obviously, being a camper van, a couple of people wandered in and got kitesurfing equipment to go for sessions and things like that, so I've tried to edit out most of the interruptions. I still think this one's a really enjoyable conversation, and hopefully you really enjoy it too. I'm sat with Mark Shinn, who is a world champion kiteboarder, businessman, runs his own company selling kiteboards, and a very passionate surf foiler now.
I think it would be safe to say my wife is a business person and runs the company. I just play with toys.
But you've had quite a long career of kiteboarding. Are you kind of a bit over it now, or are you still kind of as passionate about going and riding as you were back in the day?
No, I'm still as passionate as I was, but in different ways.
Yeah.
So back in the early days, it was all about new gear and new tricks and finding the possibilities. And then, for sure, we went through. I stopped competing, I think, in 2005. But then I started my journey with Nabile kiteboarding, and I was managing that brand for some years.
Yeah.
And then I decided to go out and do Shinn kiteboarding on my own. So it's been a journey.
Yeah.
And for each stage, I have a new passion and a new excitement for it. But for sure, it's not the same passion and excitement I had in 1999. But I'm still as excited, and I'm still frothing for a session when the conditions are good.
Yeah, when it gets good. And you mentioned Shinn. You've just recently set up a factory in Poland, right? And that's where you're spending a lot of your time, your wife's
Yeah,
Polish, so...
I relocated 2.5 years ago. I lived nearly 20 years in Tenerife. And
Okay.
2.5 years ago, we relocated to the south of Poland, which might not seem a natural progression. But, after 20 years of basically living the dream changes a bit.
Yeah.
And I don't have the burning need to be on the beach every single day for 8 hours. And it just seemed a better place for us to be for our business and for our future and my family growing up. And
Yeah.
So for now we're located in the south of Poland, which is very interesting. It certainly gives me a fresh perspective on everything. And I think it's safe to say that in the summer I actually kite more hours living in the south of Poland than I did living on the beach in Tenerife.
Really? Is that because when you're on the beach in Tenerife, you were like, oh, it's not quite good enough, or
there's always an excuse not to go when you can go
right
every day. Yeah? It's like, oh, I'm going to wait for the tide, or the waves aren't really good, or it's not quite windy enough, or I need to do this. But it takes me about 6 hours to drive to the nearest coast from where I'm living now.
Wow.
So by the time I get there,
you're going.
Things seem pretty focused.
Doesn't matter how bad it
seems a shame to drive 6 hours and then
turn
not go kiting.
6 hours back. Yeah, that's.
Although my record till now was to drive 6 hours, arrive on the spot, find it was blowing 45 knots, and I was supposed to be testing foils, and I tried for about 15 minutes, stopped, looked at the forecast, decided it was only getting windier, and drove home again. So I think that's my record, is 12 hours driving for 15 minutes.
Wow.
Kiting.
But that's pretty good dedication.
That's pretty stupid, but
well, yeah, it depends which way you look at it.
Yeah, I think I tend to study the forecast a bit more carefully now than after that episode,
and make sure you're going to score it pretty good. You've got some lakes near you though that you can kite on, right? So
I have. There's a lot of lakes in the south of Poland, and there's a surprising number of kiters there.
Yeah,
and I don't want to bang on about foiling all the time, but on the lakes, it's the saviour. In fact, in many occasions, I would rather foil on the lake than the open sea, because the surface of the water is much flatter.
Yeah.
And it's foiling is also more fun when the water is flatter and not too choppy.
Yeah.
So and you just don't feel the gusts. So on a twin tip, it's really laboured and hard work, and on the foil, it feels like an ideal day.
Yeah. So you're not getting pushed around by the wind as much when it's a bit gusty. It's just kind of all gliding along and nice.
Yeah, the problem on a twin tip or a surfboard is in the lulls you stop.
Yeah.
And that's what's so frustrating in gusty conditions, is stopping and going and stopping and going. But on the foil, you're always going.
Yeah, because you've got the apparent wind and the foil's got the glide.
So you really don't notice it so much. So it's a very good solution for that.
I guess that's the one, talking about foiling again, but it's the one benefit of that side of the sport is it's opened up a lot of spots. Kiting on a lake on a twin tip in the south of Poland probably wasn't that much fun, but people still did it because they wanted to kite, whereas now they can foil and it opens up something to being a lot more fun.
This is why foiling is gaining so much in popularity, because it does open up so many possibilities. It's not about fashion, it's about hours on the water.
Yeah.
When you do have time to go, not losing time because there wasn't enough wind, or that's what excites me so much. It's just a good twin tip session is a good twin tip session, and a good wave session is a good wave session, and a good foil session is neither of the others.
Yeah.
So it's something more, not just a different toy for the same conditions.
It's another sort of even more hours on the water.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago I was messing around with wake skates, and I found it very funny, but I hesitated to ever actually produce a wake skate in the Nobile Shinn range, because I felt like a good wake skate day is a good twin tip day.
Right.
So it's not an addition. It's just a swapping of toys, and it didn't excite me. But now we're talking about a real, I wouldn't call it game changer. It's like a game addition.
Yeah.
It's like more toys for more good days on the water.
Yeah. And when you mentioned when you sort of finished riding professionally and stopped competing and things like that, you went and got the job at Nobile. You were creating their board range for them, right?
It's a bit probably not quite right to say a job at Nobile. I actually wanted to start my own board brand.
Okay.
And I went to the Nobile factory in Poland because they had been making boards for a few key brands before that.
Yeah.
And I'd worked a bit with them with my previous sponsors, and I went to the factory there to set up my own brand. And I talked to Darius, the owner of the factory, and we decided that together we could do something better, faster and bigger than I could do it on my own, or he could do it on his own, as I had many contacts inside the industry
you had the name
and a name, and he had the technology and the factory to produce it. And it was wildly successful. We went from being an unheard of brand to the biggest twin tip brand in the world in 2 years.
When those boards came out, they were mind-blowingly good. Like the 666 and the 555, and we got them to test, and it was just some really incredible.
But this was not a technology I invented. This was developed by the Nobile factory. But I tested the boards and fine-tuned the shapes with them, and then we kind of defined what we wanted from them and brought them to the market. So it was a collaborative effort.
Are you involved? How do you design a twin tip? How do you go about it? Are you working in CAD, or have you got designers that work in CAD for you? Or
twin tip, yes, I have a 3D designer that works with me all the time, and we have structural engineers. But to be honest, twin tips, certainly made in the ABS press technology, I consider this more to be a summation of two-dimensional pieces put together.
Okay.
You have a rocker, you have an outline, you have a flex profile, and you can tweak all of them individually to create a board. So when I design a board, most of the time designing a board is making improvements to something you've already done and making tweaks. And what I like about the way that we can work is that we can change, because effectively a prototype is a serial board, we only made one of them. We can change one thing at a time. So I can take a board, I can say, okay, it needs 2 millimeters more rocker, it needs a little bit more flex, but I can change one thing and know that I have the identical board with one thing changed. Because the problem always in prototyping is when you change more than one thing, you can't be really sure what it was that had the effect. And many times in my life, I've been surprised that what I thought was going to happen didn't happen. And what I thought was irrelevant was relevant. So for me, the process of developing twin tips is very much a methodical, step-by-step process, which means a lot of prototypes and a lot of testing, but I like to think
a lot of time, right, to do it like that.
It does, but I like to think that at the end of it, we can be fairly sure we're always going in a positive direction. And it means that when we come to decide on the production of a board for the next year, in fact, what I'm doing is taking my best prototype up to that day and starting production on it. But in truth, the R&D effort is a 52-week-a-year process. So 1 week after we've gone to production with a new model, I would like to think that I have a better one in my office.
Hands ready for testing.
But sometimes it doesn't work. I'm very consequent in testing the production models against the prototypes. And sometimes you make a bunch of prototypes and you really think you've made progress, and then you go back to the production and realize you haven't. You've just gone sideways. And I think this is really important in a brand to keep double checking that you're going forwards, because sometimes what feels like a forward step is in fact a sideways step, and isn't progress.
Sideways, and then you go into production,
and I think we've all had it in aspects of life where we've had a product that we've loved in anything, could be a phone or a kiteboard or a bike or anything, and we've bought the next years and went, actually I'm not really sure it's better. I like the one I had more before. So I do try to be very consequent, and very often it happens that I decide that the second year's production is going to be unchanged, just a graphic change, because I don't feel like I have something.
Your prototype direction hasn't made enough progress to sort of warrant changing the board over. I mean, twin tips are a kind of funny one, and you've been passionate about them for many years. I've had a sort of love-hate affair with them, where I used to ride twin tips a lot, and then I got into surfboards, and then I got into foiling, and I've actually just recently fallen back in love with twin tips. And I think it's easy to overlook the design aspects and the quality of a twin tip. Like, a lot of people will just go, oh, it's a board, I like the colours, or it doesn't weigh much. But they can really make a difference to your session, like a good twin tip over a bad twin tip.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the people that say nothing's happening in twin tips are the people that aren't doing any testing anymore. There's such a world of possibilities, and there's so many pieces to this jigsaw, which is a twin tip, that there's always something to change. There's and every piece is interconnected. Like a change in technology can affect the performance, or a change in materials can affect the technology, which will change the performance. And So it's like for everything that changes possibly outside your control, it affects everything, and you have to go back to it and start again. But I actually, that's what motivates me.
Yeah,
is to keep going.
Perfection. What's your favourite twin tip you've ever ridden? I guess it's one of
the last one I just did.
The last one you just did, right? Because
I tend to
the pinnacle of what
I
you've been
tend
working
to
towards.
segment my. I'm developing boards all the time, but as we get nearer and nearer the launch date of a board, obviously I'm more focused on what's coming up. And we tend to split our launches into twice a year. In the spring we launch the freeride boards, and in the autumn we launch the freestyle boards. Partly because if I'm testing freeride boards and then I throw a freestyle board in the mix, it just confuses things. Because then you go, well, actually, you ride the freestyle board and you go, actually, it's really harsh. And then you go back on the freeride board and you go, actually, it's missing some grip and it's not edgy, and it kind of mixes things up, especially in my head, where I'm like trying to get into a space of what I want this board to do. So I try to keep my testing a little bit focused on, okay, now I'm in my freeride headspace, so let's do the freeride boards. Yeah. And when it's finished, then I need to take a week or two just going back to the normal freestyle boards to get back into the
how they ride,
kind of the groove. And it's possible I won't ride a freeride board for 3-4 months because I'm focused on freestyle or. Probably the favourite board is the new Bronx CRB4, because I made the first Bronx some years ago and switched to using a balsa wood core for it, which balsa wood is much lighter but much softer, and requires the use of carbon to not have a board that's too soft. But of course the weight is really nice and the feeling is really nice. But it's been a bit of the first year I really loved the performance of the board, but maybe a few more broke than I would have liked. So the second year we made it a bit stronger, but somehow the magic was
lost a little bit.
Was not quite there. And then I switched to a different technology with the molds, and I felt like we were on the cusp of having what I wanted, but not quite there. And bearing in mind deadlines come and go, you have to stick to your deadlines. So sometimes it does happen that I don't really have exactly what I want when we start production, but
that's what you
have to keep going forwards. And this year I felt like I made the board that I wanted to make on year 2, but now it's year 4.
And you got there.
And I really feel I got there. I think we got the weight is good. The weight is very good at around 2 kilos. The board is amazingly plush. It's like going through butter. No matter how harsh the water conditions are, it's so smooth, and yet it's still lively and a very interactive ride. So I would say this is the board I'm most happy with, but in no small part because it felt so hard to get there.
Yeah, so it's been a long process and a lot of effort. So now you're there, you've got a nice reward out of it. Do you, when you're working on these boards, do you sort of find that it's hard to, you've got a big range, so is it hard to give each board the focus that you need to get it to where you want to be, or do some years boards stay the same and you're working on like a handful of that range? Because when you look at the Shinn range, it's quite big now.
Well, as a specialist board producer, I feel like we have to make boards for everyone.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's a bit of a cop-out to say we're a specialist board manufacturer and we only make 3 models.
Yeah.
So we do have a big range, and I try to be quite focused on them. But sometimes I haven't had feedback from customers saying they would like something changed, and I haven't felt a need to change something. A good example there is the King G, where I think in the last 2 or 3 years the shape hasn't changed at all, because I've played with it a few times, but I haven't found something better, and I haven't actually found something in the board that I really want to change.
Yeah.
And as I said before, I'm not a great believer in changing things just for the sake of changing them. So, but sometimes this year for the first time, I developed, let's say, a door-style Lightwind twin tip.
Okay.
I've never made one before because I never really understood why you would want a board like this.
Yeah.
Because a skim board or a foil will always go in slightly less wind, and I never understood it. But my wife only learned to kiteboard a year or 2 ago, and I went on holiday with her in Egypt, into Hamatra in the south of Egypt, where the water is quite shallow for a long way. And it's a big station. There are probably 150 kiters on the kite station there. It was a typical day. Everyone was out on 10-meter kites or 12-meter kites. Everyone was having fun. And as very often happens in Egypt, at lunchtime the wind started to drop. And pretty much everyone came in, blew up a 17, 18 meter kite and took a kind of door style board and went back out. And it occurred to me that when these guys are or ladies are on a 12 meter and a twin tip, they're going out and back and having a great time. And when they take their 18 meter and their door style board, they're going out and back and having a fantastic time. It's the same thing for them. They're having fun. Yeah, they're on their holiday, they're kiting. They're never going to learn to foil. They don't have the desire or the time, and probably even the skills to go through that process. They're on holiday or they're on their spot, they want to kite. End of story. Yeah, they just want to go out and ride. And it was the first time it really clicked to me what this board is for. Yeah, and when you say, yeah, but you can't ride it toe side and you can't do a Mobe 5 on it, and they don't care. They're not going to do that anyway.
Just cruising up and down,
the person for this board wants to go cruising, upwind, downwind, like out and back, and maybe some back rolls, and it's an epic session.
Yeah.
So, for the first time this year, I turned my attention to this board in our range. We call it Bernard, and in the development of this, when I really said to myself, what does this board need to have? Yeah, what are the key features for the customer on this board? And the spin-off from that program is that probably the King G will change now, because the King G is our, let's say, extra large twin tip. I always made our light wind twin tip was not geared to be the lightest wind twin tip possible. It was designed to be a light wind but performing twin tip.
Yeah.
We can do things on it still. And the development of the Bernard program means that I'm quite sure that the King G will change now, because some of the things I learned in that program will come across. So for the first time in 3 or 4 years, that board is going to develop.
That's quite interesting. I get where you're coming from with those door style boards, because I've tested them a few times and they're good at what they do. I'd probably never ride one because I foil, but you're exactly right. There's a bunch of people out there who, while we wax lyrical about foiling, it's just probably not going to be for them. You know, you've got to be able to have that want to go back to being a beginner again, and that's the precise reason there's still people that windsurf that never learned to kite, because they didn't want to go back to being a beginner and learning to kite because they were good windsurfers.
Which I can quite understand. One of my friends that was on this trip was a 5-star general in the Polish army and NATO. He's 75 years old, and he loves to go on his kite trip with his friends. He's not going to learn to foil. You know? He's not going to learn to ride a strapless board either. And he doesn't want to.
Yeah, he's quite happy getting the buzz from
and
kite
he's
surfing.
Very happy, and he's very happy now with his Bernard riding in 2 knots less wind than he could before, because it's another day when he's not sat on the beach watching other people.
Yeah, he's able to get out there. Your factory in Poland's quite a new venture. How did that kind of come about? And I guess that must have been quite tricky. You mentioned your wife.
This is
side of things, but it must have been.
This is an association. It's not strictly speaking our factory.
Okay.
We about 2.5 years ago, we had an opportunity with some close friends. They had the skills and the knowledge and the financing to start a new factory.
Okay.
But as with all things, until you actually start making product, it's very hard to find customers. And because we knew them very closely, we agreed to be the launch customer for the factory, which meant they could set up the factory knowing that they had production.
And use you as an example.
And it's a very close relationship until a couple of months ago. The Shinn warehouse and offices were inside the factory itself.
Oh, wow.
So we have a very close relationship. And in the meantime, we have started a spin-off business between us, making molded composite parts, hydrofoil wings, and other composite molded pieces. So we whilst it's not directly our factory, we're very closely linked to the Loxley factory.
Does that mean that you can make changes easier than before? Has it affected the way that you can run your business?
Absolutely, because the technology and the materials is so critical to what we do, that being on site
being able
things go much faster. Yeah, and everyone knows that. It's if you can spend time with the engineers and make the adjustments as you see it, you can make a twin tip if you're set up and ready to go. You can pretty much make a twin tip from start to finish in 2 hours.
Wow!
From raw materials to ready to go.
Wrap it in.
Yeah.
The customer.
So there is a benefit in extremely rapid prototyping, and the better you know the technology, the more possibilities
there are.
and the more we realise there are different ways to do things.
Yeah.
And it works very well for both of us, the factory and ourselves being so connected, because they can come to us and say they have quiet period for production, and we can shift our production around to fit, making sure that they're working to capacity, and it's convenient for Shinn too. So this is a very
a good step
say
forward.
a symbiotic relationship.
And do you get all your hydrofoil parts made there as well? Or
No,
is that
not at
separate?
all. This kiteboard, ski, snowboard technology is very specific for that. This composite molding company I told you about, it's Sode company. We formed this, in fact, for doing R&D projects. So doing projects for other companies who don't have the technology or the specialists they need to do things.
Okay.
And the hydrofoil was we designed it, and we manufacture through this company.
So it makes it a little bit different to be working like that, but I guess the hydrofoil stuff is so specific. And
You know,
so...
Shinn is a kiteboard brand, and we wish to keep it as a kiteboard brand. So it made more sense to when we and you know, Sony company is doing many things apart from making hydrofoils and kiteboard parts. So it was better to keep this separate.
As someone who's, you know, you're a pretty accomplished waterman, really, because you windsurf to a very high standard before you got into kiteboarding. You know, you're now into your surf foiling, sub foiling as well. Is there sort of one sport in particular that you would say, okay, if I could only choose this one sport, that's the one I would do?
I think, like many people, if I had to choose one sport, it would be surfing. It was my first love, and it's the most frustrating and most satisfying sport that I know.
Yeah.
If I had to do one trip a year,
it
would be a surf trip. But you know, it's increasingly hard to find good surf conditions. First of all, good surf conditions are hard to find, and secondly, the surfing, it's a huge sport now.
Yeah.
The spots are crowded. You know, a lot of localism problems, and it's harder and harder to score those great days for surfing. So, but that doesn't saying that surfing would be my first and last love doesn't like degrade my passion for the other things.
Sports.
Yeah,
it's just
I love to be in the water doing something, and it's just that surfing's
the
special.
The core. It's interesting. A few people have said that to me, and I think, you know, it was Pete Cabrina actually. Who said, well, the key word in all of those is the surf, windsurf, kite surf, you know, sup surf, surf foiling. It all has the word surf in it, and that's the core that everything's based around. So if you could only choose one, then go.
There's no sport where you feel more connected to the environment and conditions than surfing. Yeah, it's just you and your surfboard.
Yeah.
No extra
Nothing else.
vehicles or tools to help you. It's just it's maybe body surfing is more pure, but you know, after that, surfing is it's like as honest as you can get. And you know, one of the attractions of surfing is it's hard. It's hard physically to paddle the board, and it's hard to get yourself into the right spot. It's hard to choose the right wave. It's hard to paddle in and stand up. And you know, actually, surfing the wave is the easiest part of the whole process. You know, I know many people that tow them into a wave with a jet ski and they rip, but ask them to paddle in and they're floundering in the wrong place. They're getting cut off by people. You know, they're struggling to stand up at the right moment, and it's this is one of the beauties of surfing. It's hard, so when you get it right, it's very rewarding.
Yeah.
And it always makes me think when people say, I don't want to learn to, for instance, I don't want to learn to hydrofoil, I don't want to go back to being a beginner again. But very often it's the things that are hard to do that make it so much fun. You know?
Yeah.
I'm sure no small part of my passion for kite foiling is because I struggled for the first month of it.
Being a beginner all over again.
And you only have to look at the videos that you see online. Generally, people put videos online of something they're proud of. And when you see a lot of videos of people kiting up and down on a hydrofoil, that's probably because it's not as easy as it looks.
Yeah, they're proud
of them doing it.
And forwards.
And the same, all the videos online you see of people foiling tack, right? to foil all the way through a tack and out the other side. you can tell by the number of videos online of people doing it that they're extremely proud of it.
100%.
Which means it's not easay.
No, it's definitely not easy. I've been trying for about 4 years and I still can't consistently get them. I had a period in Cabarete when 2 years ago, and I was like, right, I'm coming back from this 4-month trip to Cabarete and I'm going to be foiling tacks. That's what I'm going to do. So I would go out and I would brain myself. Like, I thought, okay, I'll break it down. I'll just do it in one direction, so I'm not confusing myself by going both ways. So I'm just going to go one direction, foiling tack, foiling tack, foiling tack. The other way I'd jibe, foiling tack, foiling tack. And I think I had one session where after like weeks and weeks and weeks of practice, it finally clicked. And I was doing maybe 90% coming out. And I was going, oh, finally I've learned it. Like I've succeeded. And then I went out the next day and I didn't do any. And since then, I don't think I've had a day where it clicked that much. So you're right. It's probably one of the hardest things out there at the moment to do. Like, it is incredibly difficult. And I guess that challenge is what makes it rewarding. And that's what makes you want to go back and work at it and things like that. So yeah, it's an interesting one. How did you get into foiling? Because obviously, you know, you're Mr. Twin Tip. Really.
Reluctantly, because it was all going on. I think I started foiling 3 years ago. Certainly I was still living in Tenerife at the time.
Yeah.
And I was watching it. It was getting a bit more popular, but I was like, don't see the point in this. I'm not convinced about this at all. It was because, you know, foiling's a strange sport in kiting, as it's an upside down sport. It started with racing.
Yeah.
What normally happens is a sport is born and it grows and the performance gets tweaked and then eventually it arrives in a competitive format. Whereas foiling started as racing and it's trickling down to the mainstream. But certainly when I learned to foil, it was race equipment, which is extremely hard to foil on. And I was ignoring it, saying I don't believe in it. And then at one point I said, you know what, I need to learn it just
to understand it
and make a really
informed decision.
Am I gonna is this worth pursuing or not? And there were some guys on the Isle of Wight, Carbon 6, making foils, and they very kindly sent me a foil to learn on. In fact, I started going at 7 o'clock at night when all the windsurfers and kiters were in the bar.
Oh, really?
I was doing my stealth mission at night. And
disguise.
And I absolutely struggled with it. I think it was for sure 5 or 6 sessions before I actually got on the foil at all.
El Medano is where you were in Tarifa, right?
Yeah,
so that's
Tenerife.
Tenerife, yes, sorry. And that's not the easiest spot to learn at, El Medano. You've got the waves.
It's windy, it's choppy, there's waves.
There's a lot going on there.
There's reef everywhere.
Yeah, that's not the easiest environment.
No, so I kind of forced myself to do it, and I said that until I can do it with some kind of consistency, I'm going to reserve judgment. And and after some time, I was like, probably there's something there, but it's hard.
Yeah,
it's really hard. And in fact, then we decided that we should go that way with Shinn. But I felt very much from the start that we needed to offer hydrofoils as well as boards for hydrofoils. And I made an agreement with Nicholas from Zico Foils that we would supply his foils with our boards. And I got the first Zico foils from him and was blown away by how much easier it was. And in fact, looking back, I wouldn't recommend anyone to learn on those foils now because they're still hard. They're still hard, but it was infinitely easier than what I learned on. And so we were supplying the Zico foils, and that was when I decided that we should, as Shinn,
start looking at it.
We should start working on our own foils because I had a feeling that this is really going to go somewhere and this sport has potential.
Yeah.
But to be honest, it wasn't until I made the first prototype of the P-Wing that having the slightest inkling that it was going to go that way towards much bigger wings.
Yeah.
And I actually made the first P-Wing as a paddleboard foil.
Okay.
And I took it on a photo shoot because I needed to test it. And there were no waves at all. So I said, okay, so I'm going to go kiting on it because I want to test it. And I went like 100 meters off the beach, came back, ran into my computer and mailed the guy and said, guys, make a mold for it. This was already in March. And we were photo shooting to launch the new range. Everything was already in production. And I was mailing the guy saying, you have to stop everything. You have
This
to make a
is gonna
mold
happen.
of this. This is it. I was like, this is the missing link. This is the half an hour learn to foil.
Because that wing, people who don't know what it is, it's it's a front end hydrofoil wing, and it's been incredibly popular because it is so easy.
It's
right?
because I think it probably is still now the easiest foil on the market to learn on. If you can ride a twin tip reasonably well, you can get your first foiling experiences in the first hour on it. So I think it suddenly opened the door to many people. I think a lot of people in a lot of areas, hydrofoiling was started in a lot of places by, let's call them the early adopters, the better level of foilers, who were also the first guys to ride strapless, first guys to have a surfboard, the more advanced riders looking for something new. And like me, they all ended up with race foils, and they all struggled with it. And let's say the less able kiteboarders on the spot watched them and went,
that looks terrible.
Good Lord, the guy's a really good kiter and he's fighting for his life. It's nothing for me.
Yeah.
And I think it needed something like the P-foil, where suddenly guys were going, oh, he's foiling and I'm a better kiter than him. So
yeah, I must be able to do
must be able to do it as well. And I think that's what the sport really needed. I'm not saying that the P-foil was the catalyst, but I think in many areas it was. It was what pushed people over the edge.
Yeah, and opened
to say,
things up.
A lot of people knew the benefits of hydrofoils, just
thought it was incredibly
thought
impossible.
It was out of their reach.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting. And now you've got the new surf wing that you've been working on.
Yeah.
That's quite an exciting project.
Yeah, I was... we don't really know what the limits are. So...
It's very new, that sport, isn't it? So you're still like in that inception phase.
Yeah.
If we went back to what we were kiting on in 98, 99, 2000, it's completely different to what we're riding now. So the potential is that what we're looking at as surf foils now will be completely different in 15 years.
I made this Mega K wing again with a view to surf and subfoiling, and I tested it like that first and was like, it's working very well. We made a few prototypes in this one. What impressed me most was the lift is fantastic, but the turning ability of it is really amazing compared to the other surf foils I've tried. But then I also tried it kiting. One of the benefits of testing foils kiting, even if they're not designed for kiting, is the fact that you have a constant thing. You stand on it and you foil.
Yeah.
And I can look at my GPS numbers. I can take my feeling. I can balance the foil properly with the wing angles, etc. And on surfing and paddleboarding, there's a lot going on. It can be hard to to get that feeling.
You only have a few seconds when you're up.
So I took it. I took it kiting just because I wanted to tweak the angles and get it balanced and working nicely. And I realised that it does have quite a lot of benefits for kiting as well. You can foil in light winds on most foils, but that one, it starts to foil so early that it's really easy to get going in light wind.
Yeah, you're like 5 knots and you're up, right?
It's pretty much never ride the board. You can go from, most of the time you go from sitting in the water to riding the foil in
straight away,
one go.
Because it just pops up so quick.
And tacking and jibing in light winds is a delicate skill. And if you come off the foil, it's a real effort to get going again. And it just makes it easier because you can go really slow. And to be honest, you can be really heavy-footed and clumsy.
Yeah, it's kind of
still keep
it's
going.
like having the training wheels on, isn't it? So you can almost learn to foiling jibe and foiling tack on one of these huge wings on a kite, and then when you go on to like a normal wing, you've got that skill set and the mindset, and you've been able to practice the movements and get the muscle memory.
So for me, that was quite exciting. I wouldn't say it's the only kite wing you need, because for me, as soon as it gets a little bit windier, I prefer a smaller, faster wing.
Yeah.
But certainly on our recent trip to Ireland, it was pretty impressive how versatile it is. It's a very good surf wing. It's a very good sub wing. It's a very nice light wind kite wing. We're playing around a little bit with kiting in waves now on foils, and it's working very nicely for that. Because for all these things, you need the ability to keep foiling at slow speed, and that's really critical.
Have you ever had any, training in the art of designing these things and stuff like that? Because you're not a nautical engineer or anything like that, but you're an incredibly talented board designer and shaper, and I guess, are you shaping these?
I am not a
wings as
shaper
well?
at all. I have shaped boards, but I'm not the guy to stand there with a planer and a block of foam.
Yeah.
I've worked many years with D-Light in Tenerife,
Yeah.
very talented shaper, and he still makes my custom boards for me. But I think if I had to pinpoint something, I would say that I have a very sensitive pair of feet, and I can feel the differences in equipment, and I think I'm reasonably good at isolating what I want from a piece of equipment.
Yeah.
And then working towards that goal. For foils, no, I have no official training in it. I've done an awful lot of reading, and we said from the start that we would, rather than taking an expensive designer with a lot of aeronautical experience, and we decided we would take our budget and do a lot of prototyping and try to make our progress on some theory, but also a lot of
Practice
on the water
Practical
experience, because it is a new area, and there isn't actually any aspect of hydrofoils or aeronautical design where the wings have no movable surfaces. Plane wings, hydrofoil boats, they have movable control surfaces. You have flaps
so you can
and
go up
ailerons,
and down
and you can trim whilst you're in flight. And a kite hydrofoil, this is one of the only foils I know in existence where the only trimming is done by rider weight.
Yeah.
You have no ability to
'cause
move the
even
foils
like the
in
moths
flight.
and things like that, they're all trimmable.
Yeah.
So it's just down to the rider.
So it's not as simple as it seems, and there isn't a great deal of theoretical knowledge out there on what
Because
works
it's so
and what
new.
doesn't work. And the other thing you have to consider is we are going incredibly slow. Incredibly slow. You can't find me a plane that flies at 12 kilometers per hour.
Yeah.
You know? It's even the racers who are going 55 kilometers per hour, it's still
slow.
very slow. And there isn't a great deal of research into going so slow.
Yeah.
So for myself, I've actually focused on really older foil sections, which for, let's say, turn of the century foils, because they were going really slow. And for me, and the early planes didn't have movable control surfaces either.
Yeah.
So I find that that's maybe more relevant for what we're doing than let's say NASA grade hypersonic plane profiles.
And
Yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah, I guess it's kind of very different, isn't it? So yeah, that's an interesting point about spending the money on prototyping rather than an expensive designer who's got.
We
all
have
the
done some.
qualifications.
We have done some backwards analysis, and and as I suspect, it's actually very hard to get the computational analysis to match what we know is happening on the water.
Right.
Certainly, with the way we've been looking at it, we're far from being able to predict the performance of a foil from the CFD software.
So it's almost like you make it and then you have to ride it before you really know how it's going to work.
Yeah, well, I think that's very much how it goes in all things. It's you have a theory and you test it, and then you adjust your theory and you test it. And but we approached the whole foil design in the same way I do twin tips, and tried to isolate individual features, make a range of test pieces, and try to get some kind of understanding of what was happening when you change one factor. And then so we made a plan and we moved through the pieces like this, and it's I think it stood us in good stead till now. But it's very hard to know where the sport of hydrofoiling is going. So
yeah, you don't know which direction.
I for sure our most popular foil was let's say an accident.
It's kind of it's nice when those good accidents happen as opposed to the bad accidents. So one of the sort of other things I wanted to ask you about, we've talked about the board design and we've talked about the factory in Poland and designing the foils. When you're prototyping for the foils, do you 3D print and then lay them up with glass to sort of do it quickly, or are you just coming up with straight prototypes?
It's we cut the wings with CNC.
Okay.
But in fact, it's not as simple as that. To make a wing with a CNC, let's say you start with a block of material.
Yeah.
Let's call this block of material fiberglass, for want of a better word.
Okay.
And with your CNC, you can cut let's say, the top half of the wing. At which point you have to turn it over.
Yeah.
And when you turn it over, you have to, first of all, you have to hold this block still. And secondly, you have to know exactly where it is, because the machine is not magic. Yeah, the machine cuts where you tell it to cut. So you need to be sure you know exactly where your wing is. Otherwise, you can offset the top and the bottom and end up with some kind of Freudian slip. Yeah. So, in fact, to CNC a wing, you have to CNC 3 times. The top, then, let's say, a holder for the top, and then you can turn it over and you can CNC the bottom. So it's a 3-stage operation, and then you have a wing. So because we have a composites molding facility, we actually make a mold for every prototype, which means we take a block, we cut the bottom of the wing, we take a second block, we cut the top of the wing, and then we can make a molded wing from it, which means it's a 2-step CNC operation, because you're never having to turn anything. And the benefit of this is, when I have a wing that I like, I can play around with the construction as well, because I have this temporary mold, and they last for about 15 or 20 moldings before it's destroyed. So this is a very nice way to proceed, because once I think I like a wing, I can make 4 or 5 more. I can send them to my team riders.
Get their feedback.
They can try it, and this is it's not like the classic prototype where it's, when you have a good one, it's gold dust.
Yeah.
It's like, no one touch it.
No one touch it. Don't drop it.
So this is a nice way forwards, and in fact it's cost effective, but only if you have your own molding facilities, because having cut the mold, you still don't have a wing. You just have
and that gets pretty expensive. It's the classic Armada where we're getting interrupted by everybody, but that's fine. It doesn't matter. I'm sure people will understand. So, sort of coming round to a sort of an overview, I guess, so we can kind of wrap up, because we've been chatting for a while. You've had a pretty incredible career. I mean, you're one of the, as I recall it, you're the only male kite surfer to win at the time both world titles that were available, which was
PKRA and the KPWT.
Yeah, so you won both of those. That was a hell of an achievement. No one else has done it since, and there was a time when you couldn't do it because both of those tours no longer existed, so that was fine. You've got that in the bank. You've become a very successful, you say your wife is the business woman, but I mean, I'd argue that you're still there, and it's your testing and it's your drive that has helped that. And obviously, choosing your wife to be the successful businesswoman is obviously a sound decision as well. If you look back over your career and sort of where you are now, is there anything that you kind of regret or think, I would have done that differently, or I'm kind of annoyed I did that?
It's very fashionable to say no regrets, but it's an impossible situation. Everyone has regrets.
Yeah.
Everyone looks back and says, I did this with the best intentions, but I wish I hadn't. And yes, there's various points in my life where I wish I'd made a decision different than the one I did. But, I'm happy with where I am at now. So I wouldn't want to be somewhere other than where I am now.
Yeah.
So in the sum total, no, I think everything is good.
Everything worked out.
Yeah.
All the right decisions. Well, maybe not all the right decisions, but however those decisions have led you, you're in a happy place where you're.
I remember the classic Morecambe and Wise sketch where Morecambe was playing Grieg's piano concerto, and the conductor came over and said, "What are you doing? You're playing all the wrong notes." And he turns around and says, "Listen, I'm playing all the right notes, just not necessarily in the right order."
And that's how you kind of feel it's gone.
And I think that's a good way to look at life.
Yeah, that's pretty profound, I guess, that you end up in a place, and if you're not happy with it, everyone should be happy with it, and most people are happy where they currently are, but you don't know whether you made all the right decisions, but hey, it got you to where you are now, so therefore they're right at the time, or however they worked. You've done quite a bit of travelling, obviously, with your career as well, as a pro rider for Nash back in the day. Is there anywhere that you would like to go back to that you haven't been to for some time, that you think,
ironically,
I missed that spot?
When I was living in the UK, I used to go a lot to Brandon Bay and Ireland, and we a group of windsurfers used to go there for surfing and windsurfing, and when I moved to Tenerife, I never went back because you have good conditions on hand and don't have to go anywhere. And last summer I went back to Ireland, pretty much at random, and it reminded me of what I liked about the place. And then I went again this spring with Neil Gent, and we scored 10 days of, I would like to say 10 days of insane conditions, but I'm not sure it was insane conditions. I think we scored 10 days with a couple of really special days with the range of toys we had with us. It was more than an outstanding 10 days. And I just love the place. I'm past the point of my life where the sun is the most important factor. And Ireland, the country is beautiful, the conditions are amazing, the people are friendly. So I want to go back to Ireland.
Yeah, that's on your radar at the moment.
This is highly on my radar.
So I have one final question, and I had this teed up on my phone, and I don't know if it is still on my phone. But when I first published my first magazine, which was back in 2004, there was a photo of you that I chose for the cover, and I'd argue it probably wasn't the best photo I've ever chosen. Let me pull it up here. I don't know if you remember it, but I wanted to show it to you because it was quite a classic, shall we say. And one of the best things about this photo is it cemented for me what kiteboarding means to so many different people. And here we go, I've got it here, so I'm just going to quickly scroll through. So I don't know if you've ever seen this, but did you know you were flying bombing sorties to Iraq once on the cover of a magazine that I published?
I did see this. And I thought it was awesome.
It's fantastic, isn't it? So I'm showing Mark, there was an RAF pilot that was flying sorties in Iraq, and he was reading my first kite surfing magazine with Mark Shinn on the cover as he was flying to do these sorties, and I just thought that was showing a way of how cool kite surfing can be, and if
you want to learn just how small the kiteboarding market really is, this was a picture taken at a photo shoot I did with Nash in Barbados.
Yeah,
this was the Nash Thorn. This was actually the first ABS technology twin tip that Nash made.
Right,
and they made this board in the Nobile factory in Poland.
No way.
So there
wow,
you go.
So there's a prophecy
for the future.
A prophecy of where you're going for the future. Well, I'll put that picture with this podcast, so when we put it as a blog post, people will be able to look at that and enjoy it. But I'm glad that you'd seen it, because when I got sent that, I was just like, I'm just blown away. That was such a cool thing. Mark, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That was really interesting, and I enjoyed that. That was good fun. Episode 8 done and dusted. Another one. I'm actually borderline impressed with myself that I've been able to keep up this mission of churning out a podcast every week. There's quite a lot of work that goes into it that I didn't actually realise before I started recording these, so I'm giving myself a slight pat on the back for managing to keep it up for 8 episodes. My goal is to keep these running up until Christmas. I'll probably have a couple of weeks break over then, and then I'm off to South Africa in January, hopefully to get a load more of these recorded as well, because a lot of the pro riders and kite brands and people like that are out there. But I'm also looking at interviewing some different people as well, so some of the next episodes might not be so kite related. They might just be inspiring and interesting stories. I didn't want to pigeonhole myself into just one sport. We're going to try and get some mountain bikers involved, and just people that have got an interesting tale to tell, I guess. So thanks for listening to episode 8. Let's look forward to episode 9, which will be coming out next Monday. As ever, if you enjoyed this episode, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, tell people about it on social media. Help me spread the word. That really does make a big difference, because the more people that are listening to these, the more it inspires me to keep creating them and to put the effort in. Thanks a lot for tuning in again, and until next week, you've been listening to Ruchater and the Intriguing Beings podcast.